So let's begin so we don't have everyone waiting around. So in the last chapter, we covered the three main fundamentals for invading and reducing. Today we'll be looking at three space invasions, right? Three space extension invasions. In smaller frameworks, instead of relying on principles, right, the three fundamentals, we can actually just learn straight up Joseki, right, straight patterns. So in smaller areas, there's more standard moves. So that's what this chapter is going to cover today. Here, Black has made the simplest type of three space extensions. And so the best place to invade is on the third line, directly between the two stones. This invasion is most effective when you have a stone at either A or B to pincer black, right? If white had a stone at A or B, it would be pincering one of these stones. There are three main ways for black to respond. The first one is the diagonal play. When he is in a position to attack strongly, the diagonal is your best friend here. It pretty much cuts off white from like escaping on this side, and so it leads into a pretty gruesome fight, and we're gonna cover it in detail. The next standard, move would probably be the one space jump here. So with this, it's less stronger than the diagonal, right? Black can jump or use a leaning contact play against some nearby stones. It is considered a less direct form of attack. So this is still considered an attack, but less direct. And finally, if you were in a very weak position, like white had both sides really strong, then we would use the under attachment. When black is not strong at all, he can play a purely defensive move, the lower attachment. I think a lot of you might be aware of this one most of all, right? So we're going to go over all of them, and these are pretty useful skills and techniques to know. Even if you think you know them all, even myself, I got some use out of like some of these variations. So this is, some of it was new to me. So in this case, we can see, like, let's say if black had an enclosure, and then black tried to expand as far as it could, right? And then white invaded. So this is where the problem starts. In this case, we can see black has some strength here. And so the best move to play is the diagonal move, right? Here, black extended from his corner and white invaded. Using black's strong corner, he can use the diagonal attack. White usually won't invade here unless it has both supporting stones. So it needs this side and this side in order to get a successful invasion in here. Keep in mind that, well, we'll just see at the end of the variations. But yeah, you wouldn't normally want to just jump in here without help. That's for sure. That's pretty much what it was saying. So if white pushes up and black hits on top and white hanes, black gets the cut. And so this is actually pretty interesting. White can live by playing the attachments here and here. So you'd play here, black would draw, play there, and white would draw back. Same thing, draw back. White can actually live in this tight space. Um, but this would be living in Gote, and it would give black lots of outside power. This is not a good result for white, so instead let's change move 3, right? The book doesn't show it, but I'm pretty sure if we just follow what we were saying, right? If we played these under attachments and drew back and played this, we have life here, right? We can see we live in Gote. It's not fun to live in Gote, that's for sure. And you can see black gets Sente with a lot of power on the outside, right? Not sure what the best connecting move would be. But I think it's very interesting that white can live in this really small area. But this is considered not good for white. So let's change move 3. So instead of pushing up here, the correct move for white is actually to play the diagonal play here. And now black has a few options. If black was to chase this way, white leans on this or pushes on it. Cut. Extend the sacrifice, right? Increase the sacrifice. This is something we learned in the Making Good Shape book series we covered, where, you know, when we have a stone that's on the third line, we usually want to increase the sacrifice so we get more free moves. And in this case, after, you know, black needs to save these stones by killing these, well, now white gets to jump out. And so if black pushes here, we can see, well, I'll read the script and then we'll go over it, but white's correct play is 3, so the diagonal move here. If black played 4, this is a mistake. So black playing here is a mistake. White can create a sacrifice with 7 and 9. Black needs to take them, right? And this creates an escape. Black can't cut at A, so this is a failure for black. So once again, the book does, it just stops here, but we can clearly go over it. If black was to try and push and cut, right, he gets Atari'd and he would get killed here. And so this is really nice. This is a very nice sacrifice to allow white to get out. And it doesn't allow black to cut, right? And so black would have to come back or something. So this was really, really interesting. Once again, seeing that if you have friends on these sides, you can make these invasions. Finally, if black was to play the proper line, the best defense, which you know, this is something we can definitely learn and take away from, even though it's kind of specific. But the idea is that, you know, we want to keep our opponents split, right? So white's trying very hard to get to this stone, so we keep white split. White will push and jump, right? And trying, now white's trying to split these two stones, right? And so each move that we're playing, we're keeping each other split. So when black uses 4, he separates white, and white separates black with 7. 8 causes a running battle, and this is considered equal for both sides, which is nice for white because this was originally like black's area, right? So I find this really interesting that it creates like almost an equal result, even though black had what looked like a superior situation here. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was pretty good. So then, once again, this chapter is about invading 3-space extensions. In this first one we covered was the diagonal, right? When we're strong, we can use the diagonal to separate one with this stone and then fight. So that's the first example of when you're powerful here. Let's look at a different example. So at this point, we have Shusaku diagonal, and it's clear that black is a little overextended, right? This was actually fairly normal Joseki, mind you. It was actually very normal to have a 3-space extension from a Shusaku's diagonal here, right? Like if you played this and white played here, black would play 3 spaces. So this is, it used to be very normal. Nowadays, you actually see black play B12. Before the computers, B12 was considered too small because when white kicks here, it's a 2-space, it's a 2 wall with a 2-space extension. Anyway, none of that's in the book. It's just my my knowledge now for Modern Go. But back in the day, we used to jump 3 spaces because we thought was too small. But now it's considered okay. Anyway, so now white jumps in to the 3-space extension. So this is definitely the start of it. Welcome, Arunas. We're still pretty early. We're going over 3-space extensions and invasions. God King, also welcome. Thank you guys for coming. You haven't missed too much. Essentially, we're just covering 3 spaces, right? 3-space extensions. So white jumped in, and this was very normal. And then black uses a 1 jump. And here we are. This looks pretty, I'm sure you guys have seen something similar to this effect often, right? And you understanding why it's played like this, I think you guys kind of get it now, but it's fun to explain and like examine. So here, when white invades at 1, black is not strong enough for the diagonal play. Remember last time we talked about using the diagonal to separate the 2 opponents. But in this case, white is really powerful here, and black is not. And so we can't use the powerful attack. Instead, we have to use the less powerful attack. Instead, we need to use an indirect attack. Black 2, which was the 1 jump here, is the one jump that we looked at in the first diagrams. And it also works as a leaning attack, right? We also said that you can use contact leaning attacks. We learned about this in, I want to say, chapter 2. So as you can see, just like math, like we have to learn the basics and then it builds up on top of each other. Anyway, leaning on white to gain strength. So we see that black leans on white and then gets stronger. And so now this becomes more under attack. If we continue, white can play like this and black comes out. And funny enough, I think something very similar happened to the like this in one of my recent games. I don't have a memory on the date, but something like this did happen where I had to jump and lean and then kind of like fight my way out. Anyway, it's clear that black is just trying to fight out its way out, right? Because it doesn't have a corner, doesn't have a base, so it's going to have to get out. And while it's getting out, it's putting pressure on this group to gain strength to attack this one. So now white also does the same. It leans on a weak stone to get stronger. And this is where it looks like the book ends. Obviously, white would probably push one more time and then jump, and it would become a running battle. But white escapes with 5, but black has some good momentum. This is a running battle once again. The book doesn't mention who it's favorable for. So, with it being called a running battle, I'll say it's fair for both sides. If the marked white stone was not here, the book mentions black could have used 6 to attack at A. So if this stone wasn't here, instead of pushing, black could have cut. And then it would have been an even messier fight, right, if black cut here. But yeah, I find this interesting, right? We're trying to look at examples of when to use the diagonal, when to use the one jump, and when to use the under attachment. In this case, we have like what could be an even fight. And so instead of like just bunkering down with this move, which I'm sure some of us have done, I'm sure even myself have done, because like at the time, maybe this is the only Joseki I knew. Um, yeah, this is the wrong time to use this because black still has some strength, right? So we can get some attack going on, right? And that's exactly what we did here. All right, so now we're going to look at when it's okay to use that under attachment, and it is pretty much here. So here we go. So now the situation is much different, right? We can see white owns this corner, so white has strength here. And when we approach this 3/4 stone, if white uses the Shusaku diagonal, once again we use the 3 space extension. Now, once again, I'll mention this book was written in the 70s, I believe, maybe the 60s, but I think it was the 70s. So this was how we used to play before AI. A lot of people nowadays will play the 2 space extension. But anyway, we'll get back to the book. So you can play the 3 space extension, and this is definitely the time where you can't really fight back, right? If you tried the same thing, this white stone will just conquer this stone, right? It's much different from the last diagram. And so we need to use something much more subdued, right? Which is the purely defensive move of attaching under. So the lower attachment. This time, let me make this chat box bigger. This time, black doesn't have friends on the side of the board. White's invasion is much stronger. In this case, the under attachment is the better move than the diagonal or the one jump. This move is less of a push to connect. So black is not actually trying to connect to its stone, believe it or not. This is more of a sacrifice to make shape on the outside. White can choose to continue or use it as a forcing move to Tanuki. I like the options white has here, right? Like white could be like, okay, I used my forcing move. This was a good exchange for white. Now I'm just going to play somewhere else. I like that idea that white has that option, because 9 times out of 10, I would just continue, right? But anyway, we're going to go into the continuation. So if white tries to cut, we then have black cut. White takes the stone. And because white is so strong here, that white gets this cut, which is, not always the case. So this was really nice for white. Black Ataris and white takes. This common Joseki leads to a sacrifice of the number 2 stone for black to make exchanges for the outside. In this case, white has the option of playing 9, which leads to a big corner, which is this move. And black 10 is not played to live, but to increase the sacrifice for more forcing moves. Um, so, like at this point, I don't think a lot of players would play B15, right? I could be wrong, but it just feels like it's just going to die, right? But in reality, just because it's going to die doesn't mean we can't use it as a forcing move. So this is increasing the sacrifice. That seems to be a main theme of a lot of these. Same here, right? Black pokes here to make this weaker. And then black gets to take its forcing moves. And each one of these moves is like a forcing move. So finally, black has a lot of cutting points, so black plays 18. Black 12 allows black 14 in Sente, right? This attack here. Also, after black 16, right? Where's black 16? Here we go, the turn. After black 16, B and C are Sente, which will help the invasion of D. As we can see, white gets a very large corner and black gets a very nice strong outside. Black could change 18 for A, so black could also play this way. That was mentioned. And, you know, the reason why you play 12 is so that B and C become Sente for black. So this is a really nice Joseki to know. I know a lot of double GQ players, I think, catch wind of this Joseki. I remember learning this when I was about 7Q or so. But this is very common. And now, essentially, we're learning when to use it, right? Just because you know it's a Joseki and you know it will help, you know, these stones, doesn't mean that it's always right to play, right? And so we need to remember the other diagrams to know when to use the diagonal, the one jump, and now this one. Because I've definitely used this in situations where I could have done something better, right? Like the diagonal or the one jump. So I wanted to really point that out. Last, the book goes over attaching on top. Sometimes this can be correct, but essentially this is never correct. So let's talk about that. I don't want to say never, but the book mentions it like that, and it makes me kind of laugh in that situation. So as you can see, we could attach on top and then live on the underside, right? The other side, we were making a big influence on the outside, right? Or a strong influence on the outside. This is living on the inside. Black looks like it could make the opposite exchange on top, but this is considered a big loss for black. Black is pushed down to the second line, and is considered small, while white is very thick in Sente. Black 6 is a move that should be forgotten. That's what the book says. So I really thought that was kind of interesting to see. Because, like, here, I'd be like, I'd feel okay as black, right? We got to kind of spoil white's left side. But apparently, according to the pros, giving up Panuki on the outside like this is way too good for white. So either way, I thought that was funny. The book told me to forget this move entirely. Just don't even use it. Um, but make your own judgment, guys. And of course, if the board matters, right? Like if this was endgame and it changed 20, 30 points, then I'm sure it would be worth it at some point. But anyway, we're going to move on. So those were the 3 examples of when to use the diagonal, the jump, and the under attachment. Now we're going to look at this 3 expansion, 3 space extension. This is the most common 3 space invasion with the most variations. The best points to strike are these 3, and the other 3, these 3, are considered inferior. The book gives a strong warning not to play K4. Let's see why. I remember specifically against Struggle Bus, I played K4, right? Not it was like on the top, you know, it's not the exact location. But with this extension, I played this, and the book warns not to do it. So clearly, even at my 1K level, I was still making mistakes. So this is where I was saying I was learning some new stuff from this chapter. Even, you know, even though these are very specific, I would say that this actually happens quite often in your games, right? These three space extensions with the third and fourth line together. So this was really useful for me. Some of it I knew, some of it I didn't. But let us start. Um, so first, we'll look at the bad move, right? This is the one I was telling you I actually used like maybe a month or two ago. Black attach, and then white Hanes, right? White's trying to get inside here. But because of this stone here, it just can't happen because it doesn't show in the book, but clearly if white was to try and invade like this, then he'll just get captured, right? And it doesn't show in the book because it's pretty obvious. So white has to block here, and then black gets to hug under. And so now white tries to break in, but instead black has become much stronger. And white is pretty weak, heavy, and with a shortage of liberties. So examining this, we could see that this was one of the bad points to invade. And once we played here, it just kind of helped white. It was like a thank you move. Or sorry, it helped black. It was a thank you move because white really got nothing good out of this. White has a shortage of liberties. It's pretty heavy and weak, so not good. So the book really warns against this move. So keep that in mind. I think that's a pretty useful lesson. Let me just see. There was no other variations here. Right. Okay, just the one that I made. Okay, so now we're going to look at invading on this point. The correct invasion is 1. We will check these variations first and then come back for A and B. So black has a couple options. I forget which one I made first. It looks like it was the one on top. So normally we would attach on top. This is very common. Black 2 is the most natural and often correct reply. What has, I don't know what word that is, standard. Maybe I was supposed to write white has standard continuations with A, B, C, and D. White B is strong, but relies on a ladder. Other than black 2, if we go back to a move, if we go back a move, he can reply at D. So I have to remember that black could also play this diagonal, but we'll first go over these. This is actually a very interesting lesson, especially for double-digit Q players and lower or higher SDK players. This is something I didn't fully grasp until I was like 2 or 1 Q. But the idea of how strong B can be, right? Normally, I would just I'd break the tiger's mouth and extend and break this part and then just live under. But this is far stronger, and it's very specific on how it works. Some of you might know how it works. I'm assuming a lot of you might not if you're coming to a double-digit Q class. So we're going to look at this one extensively first and then talk about the others. Glad you came. All right. So for this move, in order for this to work, you need to worry about both sides of the ladder. So what ladder are we talking about? Well, black has 2 options, right? And so the strongest option for black is to Atari here. If white comes up, well, now black has a weakness for sure, and can attack, but will still have a weakness. And so if black fixes this weakness, now we're going to rely on this ladder, right? If white has this ladder, this invasion has already been considered pretty good for white, right? You get a capture, you've reduced significantly in Sente. Sorry. Let me read the script. White's wedge is the strongest reply to the attachment. The ladder at A has to work for white to play this. If the ladder doesn't work, black's 4 and 6 is considered too good. On the other hand, if white has the ladder, black is in a tight spot if the ladder works, right? And so the idea is if this ladder doesn't work, it doesn't show it in the book, but clearly if black just gets out, especially depending on the board, this would already be considered good. Other options you could, yeah, I mean, I would if I was in the situation, I would definitely just play out, right, and you'd have something to attack. And it would depend on the board, but this would be really bad considering for white, right? If the ladder doesn't work. If the ladder does work, really black doesn't have many options. Um, we'll go over them, but let me just follow what we have. So let's see. So another option for black is to play B here. If we do, then white gets to Atari. And then now this ladder comes into play, right? Depending on how white wants to play it. White could take the ladder now. In the book, white first makes this Atari. But black could play 6 here instead of connecting. The question is, does this ladder work? So you need to judge both ladders before you can wedge at 3. So in this case, black has 2 options, right? And can direct where the ladder is going to go. But you have to be comfortable with both ladders in order for this to be successful. That's where it comes from. And I think that's pretty hard for people to understand when they're first looking at this move. Because when the crosscut comes into play, the game starts to become very, very complicated, right? There's so many variations that could happen. So understanding, knowing that when you wedge here and they Atari and you come up, there's 2 ladders and black's going to get to choose which one it wants to play. So you need both of them to work in order to make this powerful play. I think there's going to be more examples, so let us take a look. We looked at both of them, so that's good. But there are more examples of this. We just got to find them. So let's first look at this one. As a non-contact play, it is considered much stronger to play black 2. So this is also frequently correct. Funny enough, out of my games and out of many games that I played at my level, I don't see many people play this move at all. Right? Like I almost always exclusively see this move, or sometimes I'll see this move, which is also another option depending on the board. Occasionally is best for black to descend to 2 or jump to A, right? You could also consider jumping to A. A lot of the times your teachers will instruct you not to do this. A lot of the times it's wrong, but occasionally it is right. Let's talk about the black attachment and the white wedge. Okay, so we're gonna move on, I believe. I feel like there's a lot more to this, but we'll see on the next examples. I will say that I've used this kind of often as well. It makes me feel like we're going to have a weak group to attack. Um, I've used this plenty of times. Can't say I've used this, but there's got to be some examples where it shows us. So let's keep going and we'll find them. But yeah, I like that this is considered the strongest play for black. It's something new for me, right? Let me just see if I missed anything. I'm always this part of the like lecture has so many variations. It makes me nervous. I'm missing something, but we'll see. It has so many branches. It's kind of hard to follow. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is going to be examples of the ladder working on both sides, right? We can see when white invades here, if black attaches. Well, now we have a ladder breaker here and a ladder breaker here. So this is the perfect situation when you can use the very strongest move you have in your arsenal, right? Which is to wedge here. So from the previous examples, we looked at R11, and that we could see because the ladders are here, then this won't go that well for black, right? White's going to take some type of piece out of this, some chunk out of this. So what if we just Atari on the outside, right? We can't Atari on the inside. So if we Atari on the outside, we connect to our stone, and white gets to push us around and then gets to jump. And so white kind of just lives and takes the points. Black gets some outside, but the problem is there's 2 cutting points, and so position is considered unfavorable. Um, I've gotten this position many times, and yeah, it stinks if you have to come back and fix like one side. So I could definitely agree that it feels a little crappy, right? If white takes all your points and then your wall doesn't do much. Um, so this is a variation I never would have come up with. I think it's very interesting. Because the ladders work for white, I probably wouldn't have played here in the first place. But if we push up and white Ataris, and like feel like this gets a little confusing, right? If I was playing in a real game, I'd have to spend a lot of time reading this out. White Ataris, and because black is here, this ladder doesn't work. So white has to push up, and now black gets to take this stone, and white gets to hit the head of two stones, and black has to jump and white attaches. So you can actually save both sides as black, which is something the other diagrams weren't really talking about. But you can save both sides for black. Here's the thing, though. So I'll read the script and then we'll look at it. You can still Atari with R11, and black gets to save his groups and get Sente. But white made a very large wall of thickness and moves at A or B. So if white gets to play A or B, it actually reactivates C, which would then, kind of just kill this whole thing, right? So even though black has Sente, I'm sure black would want to, rid himself of these weaknesses somehow. Maybe by taking or clamping or trying to just take A and B first. Um, so yeah, this was definitely new. I don't think I've ever seen this in a game, and I found it very interesting. A lot of things that I see would probably be um, probably. I'm not sure actually. I don't know. Like maybe something like this or like this. I'm not sure, but I definitely have never seen this variation in my life, and I thought it was pretty interesting because have had to deal with the wedge many times. But this looks pretty decent for white because it has this nice aji and this thickness, and it looks somewhat nice for black because black got to keep both of its sides, even though it had a huge disadvantage. So I guess all I can say is these are the standard variations of the wedge. You need the ladders in order to play it as the white player. So hopefully we've added something new to your tool set and given you the timing when to use it, right? Um, is there any other variations here? No. So it might be in the other examples, but of course we're going to talk about breaking the tiger's mouth and stuff. It must be in the other example. So let's see. Okay, so here we go. So we can see here's another 3-space extension. White then invades in the proper place. We can see that there's a ladder breaker stone here, so the wedging is not an option. Black has a ladder breaker, so the wedge is not a good move here. So instead we extend, right? So now you can see when it's the proper time to extend. If this ladder breaker wasn't here, we would use the strongest move, which is the wedge, but instead we are going to extend. Black has to fix, and then white can just fix himself here. Now, mind you, after 6, white gets Sente and white's alive. I'll read the script, but it's going to talk about other moves. Linking to the corner with 3 and 5 is good. White could play 5 at A, which apparently I didn't mark, but it was here. And where 6 is. Oh, okay, we're talking about this one actually. So white could have played here, but that could have led to complex variations. So 3 and 5 are good moves. White can be satisfied. White gains profit and black gains power. It's considered even, right? White got some profit, black got some power. I do remember the book talking about this, but I must have took out the script. I think the more easier move to find would be this one, right? We could play this one, and black would probably have to answer, and then it would go something like this, and it could get really complicated. The book decides not to show any of this because it was just satisfied enough to play this move. So keep that in mind. It's just saying that these could be more complex. Thank you for the follow, Suppies X, Sippis, Sippis XO, or X0. But anyway, let's continue. So yeah, White could have played A or 6, I think. But we don't have to play. We don't have to play complex variations. We can just play simply. It's kind of just showing you when it's better to play this versus this, right? I think most of us, including myself, would just play this automatically and not really worry about the wedge. Sometimes I would, but now that I know that the ladders matter, right? We should always know when to use the wedge and when to use the tiger mouth breaking move. So I like this. I like these examples. They're good reinforcements for stuff I should know. Here we go. Okay, so this is the thrust. In this case, white invasion and salvation is above. Use the thrust. So in this case, we have a stone here. So there's a very clear direction that we want to go when black attaches to us, right? I think intuitively, anybody who's playing would realize that this is the best move. Um, so I don't know how much in detail we need to go into it, but the idea is that yes, we want to run to our friends. Black can't separate us, but one thing that I will say is this is a good move to know. Let me just get to the script and then I'll talk why 6 is good to know. So, here's the moves, right? White then connects, and then black then plays here. This is a standard variation. If white didn't move up and play at 8 instead, he would risk losing everything. So if white didn't play 3 and then played down at 8, we could see that white would be in a lot more danger. The wedge here does not work as well, and black has one variation at 6, but it's not as good. So we can look at that as well. But let me just explain this one really quickly. Hopefully I won't lose my place. It's here, so I'll remember that. But I think a lot of people would play this when they're first starting at the double digit Q level. I know I was a culprit of this for quite a while. And the idea is that this bumps your head, right? None of this is in the book. This is just my knowledge, and I wanted to impart some wisdom to you guys. But bumping your head here feels really bad. You have a big weakness here, and so you got to fix, right? Even if you press here to feel like you have Sente, this is always going to be a weakness. This is always going to be a weakness. Thank you, Weisenhart, for following. This is always going to be a weakness here that's going to be really annoying. And like if you keep going, right, white's just developing really nice. Well, black keeps bumping his head, creating cutting points left and right. There's so many weaknesses here, and such like the wall could crumble very easily later on. And all you're doing is helping white. I've been a culprit of this many times before, like bumping my head like this. And so understanding that this move is very proper and just good because white has to come back and fix feels good for black. So really, really understand that, look at how thick this is. There's no weaknesses compared to the other one. And so that's mainly my wisdom I can give to you guys. But it's funny. I remember learning this and then facing. If you guys know William Luff, he comes on the channel to challenge me frequently. I watched him play this, and I was like, "Oh, he knows this, right?" And he's a AGA 4 dan, so of course he knows this. But it was interesting. I remember specifically learning this compared to this, and why not to play this. And then I just started seeing it all over the place. So hopefully that'll happen to you, right? Hopefully you'll remember this and you'll start seeing this more than this, right? Because this is really bad. Okay, so finally, the variation that I was talking about is instead of playing here, which is the proper move, black could play this, but it leaves a weakness, right? If white just Ataris and black takes, um, let's read the script. If black really wanted Sente, he could play 1, and but white is stronger, right? So white just ends up getting capture and is much stronger. and black is thinner, right? Black has a weakness, a cut here, and that's kind of it. I didn't really read that out correct all that well, but the idea is that if black wanted Sente, because this is Gote, right? If black wanted Sente, black could play this, and then now black has Sente, right? But just black is thinner, right? Black is weaker in the situation, white stronger, and so this isn't really worth it, considering. Um, the only thing that black is hoping for, and this is kind of like an overplay or trick play, which you shouldn't play in this manner, right? This would be called like wishful playing or wishful thinking, right? The idea is that black wishes that white would Tanuki, because then black could then Atari and seal white in, and that would be really good for black. If white Tanukis, black plays 2 through 9, and this result is too good for black. White shouldn't have invaded in here in the first place, right? If it's going to end up like this. So, don't play wishful go, play the proper way. These invasions happen all the time, and so knowing that not bumping your head and knowing to connect here is very good knowledge. All right, we're going to move on to the next example. It is tough for double digit cube players. Yeah, a lot to learn, right? There's always something to learn. We're getting close to the end, guys, which is nice. Let's see. Okay, so in this case, we see here, right? This looks like a pretty normal development, right? Kind of. White has a 2-space base. White approached on this side, and then white gets this invasion, right? So here's where all the problems and stuff starts. I was just referring specifically to the wedge and the ladders. Yeah. So guys, if you can't see the Twitch chat, Buzzsaw is talking about the wedge when we were wedging, and I think that's true even for 1 to 2 Qs. I think they mess that all the time, right? For me, it was a really good review of what I did learn. So now we know when to wedge and when not to wedge. Hopefully, you guys remember to look at the ladders on both sides and remember what ladders we're talking about. All right. So we're gonna get back to this one. So we're finally going to be able to see the diagonal. Once again, I almost never see anybody really. Well, I mean, I use the diagonal and attachments and stuff, but I don't see it as often when it comes to you between these two stones. So this is something that I just don't see that much. So let's talk about it. Um, Here, if white 1 invades, he actually creates 2 weak groups, and black uses the diagonal move to take advantage of his power. I think a lot of the times we don't see white invade when he's weak, so maybe that's at my level where we don't see this a lot, but I know a lot of people would just automatically, without thinking, just play here. Um, so, this was a good lesson. So, anyway, white's weak here, and so that's why we use this move, so that we're separating these 2 weak groups. White tries to get stronger. White tries to get stronger. White actually can live here, right? We need to make sure to connect our groups, and white lives, and then black gets to hug the stone. And so in this sequence, white 1 is considered an overplay. So this invasion was an overplay, right? Black punishes with 2, and although white lives on the top right, black gains lots of thickness and a strong attack on the bottom. So ideally, if we're looking at this just in this area, then you could say white won, right? Because it got a good invasion. It took away the corner. But if we look at the whole board, black's thickness is facing the whole board, which is going to be very useful for the game. And this 12 move is very powerful against this, right? And so this group most likely will die, or at least get harassed into only 2 points, and black will gain a bunch of thickness out of this. So sometimes you got to flip your perspective, right? In a lot of the cases where we saw white invade under black, or in this case, same thing, black always usually tends to get more power, even though white gains some profit. So you have to be okay with having power versus profit, which I know a lot of people feel like, especially at the double digit Q level, feel like they failed, right? When white gets a good invasion on a group, they feel like they failed. But just understand that this is very small. The main risk is that if white cuts at A, so A here, but essentially the book says black should be able to handle it, and the diagonal move is a much stronger response than the attachment. So, we would, as players, we would definitely worry about the cut at A, but would probably be fine, right? Like even if white comes out, we'll just have a pretty advantageous fight, I think. Um, but regardless, maybe that's not the best response I did. Maybe you should just start attacking it immediately, right? Maybe something like this or something. But anyway, point is, yeah, so this is one way to go, and the diagonal is the better response. So we're going to look at the attachment and see why this is better. So if we attach here, white's going to use the thrust, right? Remember we talked about the thrust towards its friend, and then gets to attach under, and we talked about this move extensively, not to bump your head. And then we get to play 8 here. So this turns into the attachment thrust. This helps the weak group stones on the bottom. So it's a big success for white. So before this was considered a weak group. And after we attach on top and allow the arm thrust, this is no longer a weak group. So this is considered a big success for white and kind of a failure for black. Once again, you have to kind of change your perspective a little. It's kind of, sometimes I think, like at least when I was reading the book, I didn't realize that because he helped a weak group live so easily, this is way better than I thought, right? Like I thought, like, okay, this is all right. Black gets some thickness on the outside, white gains some profit. But the fact that he helped a weak group, that's a big difference. So that was something that struck me. All right, guys, we're finally at the last one. We're almost an hour in. I appreciate you guys being here. Mind you, this is only halfway through chapter 8, so we're going to cover the next half next week. I think this was about 16 pages out of 31 or 32 pages. I might be off a page or two, but yeah, after 5 hours of putting this together, I thought I would cut it here and leave the next half for the next lecture. But yeah, considering this is an hour lecture, I think it's a good place to start ending. We are finishing this last part of this, like, 3-point invasion, right? Well, first we talked about the attachment, and then we talked about the diagonal. And so now we're talking about when it's okay to play downwards like this. Yes, thank you, Buzzsaw. If you guys can't see, she mentioned this is great. We're doing the whole book. Anat to Al and Zulong, thank you for following. I appreciate it. So this is something that I discussed in probably one of my most recent games as well. In fact, my last 2 recent games, this happened, right? And I've been constructed, I don't know, been taught not to bunker down, right? Like never, ever, ever do I want to bunker down like this. So a lot of the times I'll use the diagonal or the knight's move to attack this, and then white kind of just easily lives in the corner, right? Which kind of stinks, but at least I get some outside power. Sometimes this is good. Other times, if white is strong, like in this case, then it's terrible to kind of play this way. So that is when it is okay to bunker down. I'm sure if any of you have taken any lessons, especially in handicap games, we're taught not to bunker down, right? And I do that same teaching because we're supposed to fight, right? We're not supposed to just hide. But in this case, when white invades, because white is so strong here, then it's okay to take the corner. And this was very informative to me because it's just against all my gut feelings, right? It's against everything I've learned over the years. So let's take a look. So if white jumps in this position, black should descend at 2 to keep white out of the corner. White could jump, and clearly we have like some under connection here, or we can jump or lean to try and separate these two groups. So, the book doesn't tell us the best move, but in my personal opinion, trying to separate these two look good. Oh, the thing just lagged and cut off my variation. Let's actually it just cut all my variations. If you guys can see this on camera. So let's reload this and hopefully it comes back. Sometimes my internet, I'm from the Philippines, or I'm in the Philippines, and so sometimes my internet breaks or disconnects. Doesn't play well with OGS. Okay, so yeah, once again, White would jump, and then I think we should try and split these two. Because if we can lean on this group, right, like this would be really nice for Black, right, to just kind of keep these two split. This is my idea. Once again, the book doesn't cover it. The book doesn't care about it, apparently, but I do. I care about it. And that idea is that if White jumps, we should keep these two split. Also, Black could play this, if I remember. Yes, that's right. Because when White jumps, it makes connecting at A much easier, but it also leaves a weakness here, right? So Black one is also correct. This makes crossing at A easier, but it leaves a weakness for White. So keep that in mind. So you could use either or. Just understand this comes with a weakness. Let's see what other variations we got. I feel like there should be a lot more here, but I just made this, so it's not from the book. Okay. So we're just going to move on. So let's talk about the attachment. If we were to attach here, this is very normal. You see this all the time as well. White's going to break the tiger's mouth, right? If the ladder worked on both sides, you could wedge. The book doesn't show us what's happening here. So it's just showing us a very simple way that White can live. Like in 3 moves, White's already alive. Um, if Black made an attachment at 1, White would take the corner, and the black wall is neutralized by the 2 white stones. So even though Black's making a thickness here, it stinks because White's already strong here. So White 3 at A might also be effective. So White can also wedge here. Consider the wedge. I find it interesting that Black plays here. Like, this is the proper play. Like, I would definitely play this, but this opens up for White to do something like this, right? And so um, that's why Black plays here in the book. So I find that very interesting, and just something that I could work on as well. Let's see. Is there any other variations? I think this is the last one. So next we're going to talk about the diagonal, right? We talked about the diagonal, the attachment on top, bunkering down. So let's just talk about D real quick. So if we were trying to counterattack, right, we're trying to use our strength to attack this, like we did in a previous diagram. Black would come down, right, to continue the attack. White makes as much liberties as it can, and much living space as it can, right? And then there's a cut here, so Black has to guard itself, and then White plays here, and you can see White is alive. White would live in the corner, sacrificing the marked stone. White is strong, and Black has a weakness at A. The diagonal doesn't work well in this case. The descend was the better choice. So when we looked at all these variations, the correct one was this one, which once again really fights my instincts. But it makes sense when White is already strong here. There's no reason to make a wall this way, right? Because White's already strong here. So this makes complete sense. And now we kind of know when to use this more than this, right? Or this. So that's it for now. I think the very next diagram that we're going to look at is this attachment. So we're gonna be covering. I don't know. Oh, my variations went away, but we're gonna be covering that next. I think it was a 3-space one actually, and I think that this is gonna actually be really useful for me because a lot of times these large knights or extra large knights they can get kind of confusing for me. So I'm excited to go over this next. But we're hitting our hour mark, so I think we're okay with stopping here for now, especially since I haven't prepared anything else. Guys, thank you for coming through. I know, honestly, like I don't want to alienate some of my audience. Obviously, I'm getting all my stuff from the book, but I know that this chapter in particular is kind of hard, right? Because every other chapter we went over has like principles and fundamentals and useful things we can use for every game we play. And this chapter, in my opinion, is very specific, right? A very heavy-handedly specific, um, about just this three space extension, right? Or just this three space extension. Where is it? Yeah, I don't know. They're in, I think you get what I'm saying. But this one's very variation heavy, so it takes a lot of practice in seeing it over and over and then trying it over and over to kind of internalize this knowledge. So I think chapter 8 is very difficult, even though it's somewhat, I think like we made it simple looking. But I'm just saying I understand the plight of like how these variation chapters can be really hard to memorize. So I wish you guys good luck. I advise you to read the chapter yourselves if you want, and or rewatch this when I put it up on YouTube. But hopefully, this gave you some ideas. It did help me with some of my own, right? Knowing when to diagonal, when to lean attack, and when to attach, right? So that was the very beginning, and I think it was the most helpful part of this. So I appreciate you guys. Um, that's it for now.